There are so many reasons to love the Star Wars franchise. There are great characters, epic battles, ships hurtling through space, and porgs. Okay, maybe that's not why we love Star Wars, but they are pretty cute. There are books, video games, movies, pretty much everything except live-action shows. Until now. Yes, our fanaticism is finally being rewarded with The Mandalorian, but what do we know about this new franchise so far? How will it fit into the fictional universe we all know and love? And what can we already start getting excited about? We all want to know the who, what, when, and where of The Mandalorian. The easiest question to answer here is definitely the where. It takes place in a galaxy, far, far away. Come on, you don't need us to tell you that. But we'll expand a little by mentioning that it takes place beyond the reaches of the New Republic. Now let's move on to the when. The show is going to take place 5 years after the events of Star Wars Return of the Jedi. You know, after the Death Star explodes, the Ewoks party hardy, and a debatable number of ghosts watch over the festivities. At the time of the first episode, we're going to be years after the Empire fell, but 25 years before the First Order from The Force Awakens comes into play. The Mandalorians were proud warriors, feared throughout the galaxy, who frequently took on work as bounty hunters or mercenaries. According to Star Wars: The Clone Wars, it all started out on the planet Coruscant with a humanoid species known as the Tong, but eventually they were driven off their land by human settlers and forced to relocate. Okay, that bit of fantasy is maybe a little bit too real. Fortunately, their leader Mandalore helped them take over a planet which they named after him. They then became known as the Mandalorians, as did the various species who had been conquered and adopted by the Tongs on their journey for a new homeworld. By this time, they had a pretty dangerous reputation, and during the Mandalorian Wars, they nearly brought down the whole Republic, but failed thanks to some Jedi Knights and one named Revan in particular. Even though Revan later became a Sith, the Mandalorians still had beef with the Jedi up until the Clone War era, where they decided to let go of their desire for fighting and conquest. They made peace with the Republic, but of course there were still some rogue Mandalorians out there, notably those known as the Death Watch, who were eager to take down the Duchess of Mandalore, Satine. This feat was later accomplished by Darth Maul, who took over as the leader of the Mandalorians. In Star Wars Rebels, we learned that after the Clone Wars, many Mandalorians had no choice but to surrender to the Galactic Empire, and the planet became occupied by Imperial forces. But independent clans remained. Sabine Wren grew up believing in the Empire but later turned against it, much to the dismay of her family. Eventually, she was able to persuade Clan Wren to fight against the Empire, which resulted in the loss of Gar Saxon and the beginning of the Mandalorian Civil War. This meant Clan Wren had to face down Clan Saxon, who had become their reluctant allies for a period of time. Now, what do Clone Wars and Rebels have in common? Well, a lot of things actually, but one of them is Dave Filoni, who worked on both projects and had a hand in reshaping the Mandalorian lore. And what do you know? He's also working on The Mandalorian Show, which is coming to Disney Plus streaming, which means he's going to see his ideas come to life literally, since the new show is live action. The titular character of the show will be played by Narcos actor Pedro Pascal. You might also recognize him from his role as Oberyn Martell in HBO's Game of Thrones. In a lot of ways, his character is described as a pretty standard Mandalorian. He's a bit of a loner who's handy in a fight and has a questionable moral character. Pascal has described the character as someone straight out of an old western, and says he's got a lot of Clint Eastwood in him. But some of his traits that undoubtedly make him hard to get along with will also help ensure he survives in this chaotic post-Empire world. In the show's trailer, actor Werner Herzog says that he's heard Pascal's character's bounty hunting skills are the best in the parsec. Since the show takes place after the defeat of the Empire, that probably explains all of the stormtrooper helmets laying around, or impaled on giant spikes. Then we see the Mandalorian fighting against a pair of Trandoshans, who are reptilian beings known for their hunting skills. You might recognize them from Clone Wars, but in case you need a refresher, they're also ace bounty hunters, particularly Bosk. People either feared him, wanted to hire him, or both, and at one point he was even working for the Galactic Empire. This means we could possibly see him or at least hear about him in The Mandalorian. Okay, we're all excited to see classic Star Wars things like stormtroopers and hear about parsecs. But what is more exciting and definitely canon than the Star Wars Holiday Special? It's a movie so good it makes A New Hope look like Attack of the Clones. Ugh, feel dirty just making that joke. But since Jon Favreau has a sense of humor, he recreated this weapon from the Holiday Special and put it in the hands of the Mandalorian. Thanks to having the ultimate weapon on his side, Pascal's character is able to easily encase his quarry in carbonite, the preferred body preservation system of the Star Wars Far, Far Away universe. There's also a scene in the trailer which looks like a flashback featuring a child. This could be showing us the conflict on Mandalore which took place during the Clone Wars. Supporting this idea are the B-2 super battle droids and the HMP droid gunship flying by. But this is then overshadowed by more bounty hunting and an appearance by Carl Weathers' character Grief Karga, who is the leader of a bounty hunter guild who hires the Mandalorian. There's also Gina Carano as Cara Dune, who fought for the Rebel Alliance in the Civil War and is a shock trooper turned mercenary. And we have Giancarlo Esposito's Moff Gideon, who he describes as a former warden of the universe. And it looks like the Mandalorian goes after him at one point. Considering that he used to work for the Empire, you can probably imagine that his resume needs some polishing up right now. Oh, and as a bonus, there was IG-11, who's voiced by Taika Waititi. There are obviously a lot of theories out there regarding what the show will be about and who the main character will be. But let's not forget one of the things that sets The Mandalorian apart from other entries in the Star Wars franchise. This show will take place during a time when the galaxy isn't being crushed under some kind of oppressive leadership like the Empire or the First Order. The trailer definitely seems to hint at a chaotic world dealing with a vacuum of power and people trying desperately to fill it. In the movies, it's generally pretty easy to tell who you're supposed to be rooting for, but things could be a lot murkier in this show. Add a protagonist with questionable morals, or at least a little bit moral flexibility than a traditional hero, and there could be some really interesting themes we haven't really seen explored before. The timeline of the film also makes it seem likely that this particular Mandalorian would have fought in his planet's civil war, and might even have some kind of connection to Sabine Wren. Although his character is described as a loner, that doesn't mean he's always been alone. It's possible his personality and his actions will be dictated by his losses. Now, we've talked a lot about the backstory of the Mandalorians, or at least as it pertains to this show, but of course we can't have a video about them without at least mentioning Boba Fett. He's a very popular character who might need no introduction, but we're going to give him one anyway. He deserves it. In the original trilogy, he's a clone of few words, and we never even get to see him take off his helmet before he tumbles into that sarlacc pit, never to be seen again. Which is crazy, since he made his on-screen debut in the indisputably best part of the entire Star Wars franchise, the holiday special. There was a time that he was considered a genuine Mandalorian, but that's no longer the case, according to the canon. In Attack of the Clones, we learned that Boba Fett was a genetic clone of the infamous bounty hunter Jango Fett, just like the ones created for the Grand Army of the Republic. But he didn't grow at the same rate as the other clones, and he was raised as Jango's son, which seems kind of awkward. Jango was the top mercenary during the last few years of the Republic, which is why they modeled clones after him. He, and by extension Boba, wore Mandalorian armor, but the actual government of Mandalore marked him as a renegade and basically disassociated themselves with him. During Attack of the Clones, he gets taken out by Mace Windu right in front of Boba. Harsh. Boba Fett may be a clone, but he's a character fans have never been able to get enough of. And really, it's hard to get enough of him since most of his content has been rendered non-canon. We have the movies, Clone Wars, and Rebels, but that's just not enough Boba for some people. Falling into a sarlacc pit seemed pretty final, but you never know. And this might not be wishful thinking on our part. Jonathan W. Rinsler writes and edits for Luca Licensing's Books division, and he's written several Star Wars guidebooks. During a Reddit AMA, he revealed that George Lucas once confirmed to him that Boba is still alive. And then there's the book Star Wars Aftermath by Chuck Wendig. In that book, Cobb Vanth and Adwin Charu are pawing through some junk from the Jawas when they discover an old set of Mandalorian armor that looks like it's seen better days, and appears to have acid burns. Later on in the same book, Boba's even mentioned by name, which makes it seem as though the set of armor was implying that this bounty hunter is still alive. If that's the case, then wouldn't it make sense for him to show up at some point during The Mandalorian? After all, both Pedro Pascal, Jon Favreau, and Dave Filoni have all explained that the titular Mandalorian is very different from Boba Fett. First of all, he's a real Mandalorian who was born on Mandalore and grew up surrounded by the culture. Also, while Boba Fett was more of a villain, this Mandalorian is a character who is taking a windy road to being a hero. Some people have predicted Pascal's character will end up being Boba Fett. It certainly seems as though everyone working on the show is trying to make it clear that this isn't the case. Although that's also what they would be doing if he actually was Boba Fett. While Jon Favreau said the show will feature original characters and not to expect the Fett, some fans just can't give up hope. After all, is it a coincidence that the weapon the Mandalorian uses is the one from the holiday special, which is the first time we saw Boba Fett? Okay, probably, but some fans think he'll make an appearance, or at least be alluded to as a Season 1 cliffhanger. And that's something a lot of people would be excited to see. While we respect Boba Fett's status as a fan favorite, we'd rather see the show take a more authentic look at the fictional Mandalorian culture. What do you think's going to happen in the show? Are you hoping Boba will make a surprise appearance? Share your predictions with us in the comment section below, and then click subscribe for more from CBR. Thanks for watching.